Hello and thank you for joining me for today's review of Let the Fire Fall by Kate Wilhelm. So my last book was a very contemporary, very edgy cyberpunk 36 Streets. It was great and it put me right in the mood for some more classic SFF. Kate Wilhelm. About 10 months ago I managed to find a book that I'd read many years before, Where Late the Sweet Birds Sang by Kate Wilhelm, and at that point I researched her a bit more and kind of went, wow, I'd like to read more by this author. So I was pleased to find this book some time back. Let the Fire Fall, in the edition that I've got, is Panther science fiction, and it has got that really nice Christopher Foss cover, which I've got to say doesn't relate terribly strongly to the theme of the book. But you've got a great science fiction-y cover. It actually reminds me of a Philip Jose Farmer that I read recently. Spaceship, and there is indeed a spaceship in this. It's kind of a wraparound, and my Panther edition is in no great condition, which is unsurprising considering how much time it spent on the beach with me. This book was copyright in 1969, so it was a few years after Kate Wilhelm started writing. Kate Wilhelm, incidentally, amazing woman. I haven't read her biography, but just looking through her bibliography, you've got a lot of standalone science fictions, novels, etc. And I loved Where Late the Sweet Bird Sang, and I thoroughly enjoyed Let the Fire Fall, but it's a very different kettle of fish to the other book. Now, this actually is another, I would call it, pastoral American science fiction. Wilhelm was, of course, an American author, and I recently read a collection of Clifford Simic stories where the introduction talks a lot about pastoral sci-fi. This feels pastoral in the beginning. We've got some small town in America and a spaceship lands. Two people hurry toward it. One is the local doctor. Is it Matt Daniels? I think Daniels, definitely. And the second is a local Lothario, a very good-looking little boy who has managed to get lots of girls pregnant. And written in 69, it feels 69. At one point it states, toward the end, it states that they're waiting on the millennium, and that one of the years in which the later part of the book occurs is 1998. It doesn't feel like the 90s. I was there for the 90s. I was there for the millennium. It feels like the 60s. When it begins, Daniels is caring for a woman who's just gone into labor. She is an unwed mother who had got pregnant to this particular local Lothario Cox, something, Obi Cox. I just realized. C-O-X, right? O-B-C-O-X, whatever. I wonder if she did that on purpose. Anyway, it caught me. So one of the girls has gotten pregnant by him. She is being prayed for by her family, who are forcing her to adopt out the child. She's an unwed married mother. Shock, shock, horror, horror. Isn't it all terrible? And it feels very 60s, not even 70s, it feels 60s. This spaceship lands and someone starts to emerge from it. Dr. Daniels starts to head toward it before he's prevented from continuing by the National Guard or the police or something. And then things continue for a while. There are aliens in the ship. They resemble humans, and they are dying. Toward the end of that particular opening episode, a small ship emerges. Two small ships emerge. We never actually learn what happens to the second ship, which I feel like Kate just forgot about it and left that going nowhere. I don't know. But one of them emerges near Dr. Daniels' house. A woman, for all intents and purposes appearing human, emerges and comes to his door. She is pregnant. She is dying, but she's also in labor. In the same time, this other this other young woman in child to Obi is also in labor. He's got the two of them in the same room. The authorities track this spaceship to the back of his property and come in to collect the woman. They call Dr. Daniels out of the room, and in the interval where he's talking to them, the two women give birth. When they all come back into the room, the alien is lying dead with a child in her arms, and the normal human woman, the abashed single mother, is lying with a child in her arms. Both of them are blonde infants, for all intents and purposes appearing human. Now with the authorities is Obi, who has seen that he's got a clear good thing. He is claiming that he was the first one to see the alien ship, and he's tracing it, and he's gone all religious revivalish. So he's there. The mother of the human child says to him, "Oh, I knew you'd come," and the other one's dead. And the other alien woman is dead. The authorities scoop up the alien child, which needs a heart operation and a whole lot of things to let it live. Dr. Daniels does the initial part, and then the child is swooped up into the medical system to be cared for as an alien, and who knows when his people will come for him. The other one is due to be sent up for adoption by the, what is the word I'm looking for? The completely humiliated single mother? Not humiliated. Thrown out of society, sort of. 60s style. Anyway, the Daniels end up liking that child and keeping him. The proper adoption can't go through because the woman vanished as soon as she was delivered of the child. But the child, whom they call Blake, grows up happily with their family, with their daughter Lorna and their son Derek, and so it continues for some time. Now, Kate Wilhelm has got a very nice style of writing, very easy, very light. I enjoy her writing style. It's mild, but it's always sort of flirting around with that glass wall between the author and the reader. So you've got that happening, and in the early chapter where the birth has happened, which happens in just the first chapter or two, I think, she talks directly to the reader when she says that is what sets it up for the prince and the pauper scenario. I think most people will be aware of a prince and a pauper type scenario, but that made me realize I haven't actually read that for a long time, if ever, and it seems to be a story that's fallen out of fashion, but it's the idea of two identical boys, one is a prince and one is a pauper. And by telling us that very early on, Wilhelm is basically telling us that the star child, who is reared in this huge multi-million-dollar estate guarded by the authorities with pediatricians and psychologists and all the best medical treatment and all the education, we'll follow this knowing that he isn't the real star child, because Wilhelm has presented us with the prince and the pauper scenario. We know that Blake, growing up with the Daniels, is in fact the actual child of aliens, but no one else knows this for a long time. Now, Obi has continued to ride with this whole, I was the first one to see the alien ship and the aliens are evil and the word of God came and hit me, and he's starting up this whole new church scenario. A lot of this seemed to me to be an examination of a specific social phenomena, that is the American Christian revival church phenomena. And you see it from several perspectives early on, with the science fiction element being the alien child, of course, and the treatment of the alien child versus the treatment of the child who is actually the alien growing up normally. What is Kate Wilhelm getting at with this book? Well, I don't know much about Wilhelm as a person, but I would say that there's an awful lot of social commentary about religions and how they operate. And while I was reading that part of this book, I kept thinking of other books. There's elements that reminded me of Hubbard, of course, a quite decent science fiction writer who went off and started Scientology. There's elements of the mind control and some of the more dodgy ethical decisions that Obi and his church of whatever he calls it, that make me wonder if Hubbard wasn't on Wilhelm's mind. I don't really remember when Scientology was created, but it reminded me of that. It also reminded me, and a bit more strongly, of Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land, where you have Mike, who was raised on Mars, comes back to Earth and starts a religion as the way to bring some of the better principles of the Martians to Earth. Obi, however, is doing the exact opposite. He starts off not believing in this religion, but just seeing it as a good thing. He surrounds himself by people who are also promoting this church, and they're employing all sorts of dodgy tactics like hallucinogenic gas later on, and various electronic medium that project his voice. There's a whole heap of ways in which he does dodgy stuff. At one point, he actually succumbs to his own Kool-Aid and starts believing that all this is true, and the reason he does this is bound up in the two boys. So early on in the book, Obi believes that Blake is his son, and after years of deciding he wants nothing to do with him, he notices that Blake is an attractive boy and has got some unusual characteristics. He kidnaps Blake away from the family that have reared him and makes the legalities so that it's his son. He brings him into the church and forces him to perform healing miracles, which Blake actually can do. This doesn't clue Obi, who is not the smartest shed in the tool, into the fact that maybe he isn't a normal boy. Instead, it messes with his not very intelligent brain, so as he believes maybe I actually am the son of God, and he goes a bit weird there for a while. Blake eventually escapes. What are you chewing? Okay. Blake eventually escapes and goes on the run throughout the world, and that's fascinating. He spends some time with the circus. He spends some time with street gangs. He does all these different things, and eventually emerges as a young man in his teens. He's living in this isolated mountain cottage, which appears to be run down, but which is set up to be nice, warm, cozy, and has 2 laboratories. Early on, it's shown that Blake is very, very smart. He picks up things from watching other children being taught things, such as his sister learns the piano. He watches, he can play the piano. And so Wilhelm sets us up to understand that he's smart enough to create all these amazing inventions that he is creating in his remote mountain hideout, which is where it reminded me of Slan by A. Van Vogt. And seriously, this book kept reminding me of other books, and that whole notion of a chosen one who has gone on the run and is doing amazing inventions in a secret laboratory. I'm pretty sure there's plenty of other science fiction themes plenty of other science fiction books that use that theme. Remind me which they are. I'm sure I've read some of them, but they don't spring to mind right now. Now, for a large portion of this book, the sociological aspect of how Obi and his church are taking over is the main thing. So it becomes a very militant church. It gets control of governors and governments, and it reaches a point where it can do whatever it wants. Because he uses so many tactics, he eventually gets the Daniels' daughter, Laura, something like that, sucked into it. And that is where Blake breaks cover. He's been off in the mountains waiting to turn 18, which is when he intends to return to his real family, the Daniels. And he doesn't realize that Obi and his church basically intend to kill him rather than to let him become known again. It's a convoluted plot, and I'm not going to go into it anymore. I would say that a lot of what Kate Wilhelm was doing there was making comments about religion and how an unethical government can do horrible things to a country. which makes it a little bit topical, even because some of the sociological control and things that happen may relate to another country in the world today. Anyhow, so there's certainly humanity and morality a core practice here. I wouldn't be surprised if Kate Wilhelm was quite anti-organized religion. I don't know what her religious views or her spirituality views were, but the way she highlights what an unethical organized religion can achieve is actually quite extraordinary. So in many regards, I thoroughly enjoyed this book. It's got one negative that is jarring to the modern reader. And I got seriously jarred on page 39 when it became obvious that Kate Wilhelm had some serious attitudes that against homosexuals. There's a lot of, not a lot, there's about 3 different spots where homosexuals are mentioned in very negative terms and quite insulting ones. So if that's going to be a problem for you, then maybe don't read this book. I'm not particularly worried about reading something that was historically written with attitudes that were historical, but because this came on me so suddenly on page 39, I have to say it was a bit of a shock to hear hear that sexual orientation being presented in such a negative sense. I'm not used to pansy being used as an insult. I think it's a very pretty flower, personally. So yeah, other than that, this is a very good book that I think most people who can read within the era it was written will enjoy. The concepts and examination of social unrest and religion are certainly very interesting, and I will read more Kate Wilhelm when I can find it. Thank you very much for watching, and read good books.